Hello aviators, aviation lovers and simulation enthusiasts. Today we're going to learn how to perform the before taxi procedure and checklist and prepare our aircraft for taxi. Your host for today is going to be a real 737 pilot. That would be me. Hello, welcome on board. Our assumption is that we already finished the engine startup procedure. Of course, all the phases before that, like the preliminary pre-flight and the pre-flight. If you're not familiar with these phases, you could find a link in the description below for videos about these topics. We are at Amsterdam Schiphol on the ground. The aircraft is already started and we're ready to start the before taxi procedure. Do not start the procedure until the engines are stabilized in idle. The captain calls for the before taxi procedure and the first officer switches generator 1 and 2 switches to on position. We can see the gen off bus's lights are extinguished and the APU gen off bus lights comes on. This is because the APU is working but not supplying electricity to the bus. Next phase will be to verify that the cabin is ready. This is done by the captain. Not in all companies you do it now. In some of the companies like my company you can do it during the taxi itself. Next step will be to switch the probe heat switches to on and make sure all 8 of these lights are extinguished. Next phase is wing anti-ice and engine anti-ice as needed. If the temperature is above 10 degrees, no need for anti-ice. Below 10 degrees and in case of moisture like standing water, rain or fog, we're going to start the engine anti-ice. And the wing anti-ice is dependent whether we're going to have an anti-ice or de-ice treatment or not. Today the weather is clear, temperature is 16 degrees, so no need to start engine or wing anti-ice. Next phase is switch the pack switches to auto. Move the isolation valve to auto. Move APU bleed to off and shut down the APU simply by switching it to off. You can see the APU gen off bus light extinguished, and if we wait enough we're going to see that the APU temperature is starting to decrease. Next step is done by the captain. This is to verify that the start levers, the ones over here that says 1 and 2, are in idle detent. Next action is done by both crew members, is just verify the ground equipment is clear on both sides. So we check outside the window, even look back towards the wing and make sure nothing is there. And after this is performed, you can announce in the cockpit that the towing pin as applicable has been seen, and we release the ground crew by hand signal. This is of course performed after we saw the ground crew on the correct side and release them. Only after that the captain calls for flaps for takeoff. Today we're going to fly with flaps 5, so the captain asks for flaps 5 and the first officer moves the flap handle to 5. So moving the flap handle to 5, flaps 5 set, and it will be a good practice to look at the flap indicator, make sure that it reaches to 5, that there's no asymmetry between left and right, and the leading edge flaps extended light, green light is on. After that we're going to proceed to the flight controls check. So the first officer will put on in the lower DU the system indications and the captain will perform a flight controls check. The first officer, it will be good practice for him to follow the captains with the hands on the wheel. Let's enlarge the system DU. We can see here the steering surfaces indications. So starting by pushing the stick forward all the way. Make sure the elevator goes all the way to the end. And let it jump back to center. Make sure it goes back to center and then all the way back. Release it, make sure it goes back to the center. Roll left. Make sure the ailerons are moving on both sides and flight spoilers coming up on the left side. Release, make sure it goes back to center position. Then to the right, again same process, make sure flight spoilers on the right side. Release, make sure it goes back to center. Hold the nose wheel steering wheel over here during the rudder check in order to prevent nose wheel movement. So today I can't hold it because it's a simulator, but we're checking out the rudder. Full left, as we can see here. Release, make sure it goes back to the center. And then full right. Release and make sure it goes back to center. After that the first officer will blink the lower DU. First officer will also move the transponder to expander state, and of course over here we should have the code for our flight or the squawk for our flight. Today we're in the simulator, so I just put zeros in all the digits. And then the first officer performs a recall. He presses the 6-pack. You should verify that all system and non-systems panel lights illuminate and then extinguish. If something stays on, it means we have a sort of a malfunction. Any last updates to the taxi briefing? Now it's the time to do it. And then the captain call for before taxi checklist. The first officer take the checklist from here and start reading the lines. Both crew members verify that the item has been preformed or that the switch is in the correct position. So captain calls before taxi checklist. First officer reads generators. Both crew members verify the generators are on and the captain says on. Probe it. Captain says on. Anti-ice, well, we said that depends upon conditions. Today, both at off. Isolation valve at auto. Recall was already checked. Auto brake, we should verify the auto brake switch is an RTO, rejected takeoff. RTO. Engine start levers, captain verifies at idle tent. Flaps. And the captain says 5 with green light. Flight controls, checked. Ground equipment, captain says clear my side and checks. First officer says clear my side and checks. And now we announce before taxi checklist is completed. After the before taxi and checklist were completed, we're gonna ask the tower for permission to taxi. So let's assume the captain is the pilot flying and he's gonna ask the first officer to ask for taxi permission. The first officer will transmit to the tower. Ground hello, November 738 Papa Mike, ready for taxi. And we're at Amsterdam today, so let me put the chart on and the tower will say something like November 738 Papa Mike, you're cleared to taxi via Alpha, November 2, cross runway 27 at November 2, continue Echo 6 and hold short 18 left. And we should read back that, so we'll read back November 738 Papa Mike, taxi via Alpha, November 2, cross 27, Echo 6 and hold short 18 left. And the tower will say read were correct and now we can start taxi. Before we start the taxi, we should set the lights for taxi. Today we're in visual conditions, so what the first officer will do is put the position lights on steady. We don't need for the logo, we don't need the runway turn off. Just put on your taxi light, and we can also do at this time, after the ground personnel left the vicinity of the aircraft, turn on the weather radar for a few seconds to verify that it's working. So we see weather radar, everything is working. You can shut it down until just before takeoff, and the pilot monitor should set terrain on his side. And we have the terrain on. And now we'll start to taxi. The way to taxi in a 737 is really simple. There are a few rules you need to remember. First of all, you don't open N1 above 40% during taxi unless it's a very special condition like you're stuck in an upslope or something like that. Second rule is when you're turning not more than 10 knots ground speed. So let's put the screen on. And you can see over here your ground speed. Maximum speed should be 20 knots, and in very special conditions like a very long leg, maximum of 30 knots. Okay, so let's start taxiing. We're gonna release the parking brakes. Open our throttles to 40%. Need to do a small correction and start turning left. And taxi over the yellow lines. Speed is 10 knots, which is good for the turn. Just make sure you're taxiing on the yellow lines. And the last thing I'm going to do before we're going to end this video is in a second I'm going to pause and show you how we can find our way on the airport. Okay, so every time we're reaching a junction, we're going to see the signs on the side. You can see here that we came to a junction. The arrows on the sides are telling us, the yellow ones are telling us which way to go. So we can see that Alpha 15 and 16 are to the left and Alpha 16 is also to the right. The black sign will say over here that says Alpha. Just a second. Okay, the yellow on black background which says Alpha says that we are on Alpha. Okay, so at the moment we are on Alpha. You can see the yellow line. We're going to proceed on Alpha and later on turn left. So this is how we find our way on the airport. I'm just putting the chart next to our current position so you can see on the cross of Alpha 15 and 16 and we're on Alpha. Okay, That's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you like the content, please considering hitting gently the like button and subscribing for the channel. I'll see you in the next time. Until then, fly safe and goodbye.